Welcome to Everything Explained. Today we ask a big question: is philosophy the origin of all sciences? The short answer is, it's a tangled story. Philosophy did help spark science, but science grew into its own thing with its own methods and communities. So, yes in spirit, and no in strict lineage. First, what do we mean by philosophy and by science? Philosophy is the love of wisdom, asking why and how, testing ideas about what exists, how we know things, and what counts as good reasons. Science, by contrast, is a way of studying the natural world that relies on observation, experiments, measurements, and theories that can be tested and revised. They live in the same family, but they play different roles. When we look at history, we see a long period called natural philosophy. In ancient Greece, thinkers like Thales and Aristotle asked questions about matter, change, life, motion. Aristotle, in particular, tried to connect what we observe with logical reasoning. He described how animals grow, how plants reproduce, how physics works. He was a philosopher and a natural philosopher at once, the origin story most people recall. Yet even Aristotle leaned on systematic observation and classification, something we now associate with science. Moving forward, the turn from philosophy to more explicitly empirical science happens in the medieval and early modern world. In the Islamic world and in medieval Europe, scholars such as Ibn al-Haytham emphasized careful experiments and measurements. They asked practical questions about optics, astronomy, digestion, and meteorology. Then came the big shift. Francis Bacon and others in the 17th century urged a method built on observation, skeptical testing, and inductive reasoning. Galileo combined experiments with mathematics. Kepler showed how celestial motion could be described with precise laws. Isaac Newton later fused algebra, geometry, experiment, and theory into a single framework, what many call the birth of modern science. If you listen closely, you can hear philosophy in those stories. The idea that we should test ideas against experience is a philosophical stance. The insistence that a good theory should make predictions we can test is philosophical too. The tools of clear argument, logical inference, and careful measurement all come from philosophical traditions. Even the famous scientific method, with its cycles of hypothesis, testing, and revision, has roots in philosophical questions about certainty, evidence, and explanation. But let's not pretend that philosophy alone explains everything. There are sciences born from practical needs and social changes, long before anyone sat down to write a method. Natural history grew from explorers, traders, and farmers who needed to identify plants, animals, and medicines. Astronomy advanced because sailors and merchants wanted calendars and navigation. The lab and the classroom as we know them today, a community of specialists, peer review, and funded research, are relatively modern developments, not a direct outgrowth of ancient philosophy. The term scientist, coined in the 19th century, itself marks a shift toward a professional, independent pursuit. That doesn't diminish the central link between philosophy and science. Philosophy asks the big questions: what counts as evidence? What does it mean for a theory to be true? How should we handle uncertainty? Science provides the rigorous methods, the disciplined skepticism, and the communal checks that answer some of those questions in real life. Philosophical ideas also shape scientific practice, the role of mathematics in physics, the debate about what counts as a valid explanation, and the responsibility we owe to explainable, reproducible results. Think of philosophy as a compass and blueprint, science as the set of roads built with those directions. So, is philosophy the origin of all sciences? The nuanced answer is yes and no. Yes, in the sense that science inherited its questions, its habits of mind, and its critical spirit from philosophy. No, in the sense that science grew branches, roots, and trunk through experiments, technologies, institutions, and social needs that philosophy alone could not supply. The history of science shows a long conversation between thinkers who asked why and how and communities that tested, measured, and shared what they found. Let me give a couple of vivid examples that show the mix. The germ theory of disease didn't arrive from a single experiment, it grew from a philosophy of causation, the idea that illness has real causes that can be shown by repeatable testing. Pasteur and Koch built a vast body of experiments, but their work rested on questions about proof and how to distinguish cause from correlation. Climate science today asks big questions about what warms the planet, uses models and data from ice cores to satellites, and tests ideas across chemistry, physics, and biology. The methods, hypotheses tested against real data, are modern. Philosophers of science remind us to think about how science works without locking it down to one rule. Popper argued that science should be testable. Kuhn describes science as moving in revolutions when new theories fit better. These ideas guide scientists as they critique ideas, design experiments, and communicate with peers. In the end, philosophy lights the path, and science follows it with careful feet. Thanks for listening to Everything Explained.